I had planned a yard sale to clear out the clutter left behind after my grandfather passed away. Most of the items were old furniture, faded photographs, and boxes of keepsakes. Among them, one item caught my attention, an old, battered radio. It was tucked away in a corner of the attic, and I never really understood why it had always given me a strange feeling. Still, I set it up on a small table outside, along with everything else, unaware that this simple radio would soon change everything. It was tucked away in a corner of the attic, and I never really understood why it had always given me a strange feeling. Still, I set it up on a small table outside, along with everything else, unaware that this simple radio would soon change everything. I had never used it much, but I remembered my grandfather once mentioning that it came from a very troubled past. I did not think much about his words as I focused on organizing the sale. As people began to wander through the front yard, I exchanged simple greetings. A few neighbors picked up small items and made casual comments about the weather or the beauty of the morning. The radio, however, attracted a few curious glances. I noticed a couple of onlookers pause by it, as if drawn by an unseen force. Even though nothing unusual seemed to be happening, a quiet feeling of unease settled over me. Around midday, when the sun was high and the yard was filled with chatter and laughter, something odd happened. I was busy talking to a friendly customer when I heard a soft crackle coming from the radio. I glanced over and saw that the dial had shifted on its own. At first, I thought it might be a loose connection or a battery issue. However, the sound grew steadily louder, a low static that soon filled the quiet spaces between the visitors' voices. I stepped closer and adjusted the volume knob, expecting to hear a familiar song or a casual broadcast. Instead, the static cleared and was replaced by a voice. It was soft and measured, speaking in simple words that were clear despite the radio's age. "Return what was taken," the voice said, pausing as if it were choosing each word carefully. I felt a deep confusion, unsure if I had truly heard the words or if my mind was playing tricks on me. I tried to ignore it and continued with the sale. But the voice repeated itself a few times. A few people near the table frowned and exchanged whispers, while others looked away. I decided to leave the radio on the table and hoped that it was just a small technical glitch. As the day wore on, more people came by the yard sale. The radio's strange behavior did not go unnoticed. A middle-aged man in a worn jacket lingered by the radio for a long time. He asked me questions about its age and where I had found it. "This piece seems to have a story behind it," he said in a low tone. I could only tell him it was part of my grandfather's belongings and that I had no idea of any special history. Later, a young woman with bright eyes and a hesitant smile came over. She asked if I knew anything more about the radio's past. I admitted that my grandfather had mentioned that the radio had once belonged to a family that had experienced great sorrow. The woman listened quietly and then softly said, "Sometimes old things speak for those who can't speak for themselves." Her words left me with an uneasy feeling I could not shake. The voice from the radio had grown more insistent by now. It repeated its message, "Return what was taken," in a calm, almost pleading tone. I started to wonder if I should try to turn it off. Yet, every time I reached to switch it off, the radio seemed to resist. The static and the voice filled the air, and I realized that the radio was not acting like an ordinary old device. After the yard sale began to slow in the late afternoon, I decided to check the attic for old papers that might explain more about my grandfather's mysterious belongings. In a dusty box, I found a faded letter tucked between a stack of old photographs and a leather-bound journal. The letter was written in plain, careful handwriting, and told a story I had never heard before. According to the letter, the radio had once been owned by a family in a small town that had suffered a terrible loss. A valuable family heirloom had been stolen under mysterious circumstances, and the radio was said to have been present when the tragedy unfolded. The letter mentioned that the spirit of the person who lost something dear had become trapped, using the radio as a way to reach out. The words, "Return what was taken," now made sense in a way I had not expected. I realized that this message was a warning and a plea from someone long gone. I read the letter over and over, each time feeling more drawn into the mystery. The message seemed simple, but its meaning was heavy with sorrow and regret. I wondered if I should do something, if I could help set things right. Yet, I also felt fear. I was no longer sure if I should disturb whatever lay behind that voice. I read the letter over and over, each time feeling more drawn into the mystery. The message seemed simple, but its meaning was heavy with sorrow and regret. I wondered if I should do something, if I could help set things right. Yet, I also felt fear. I was no longer sure if I should disturb whatever lay behind that voice. That evening, as the sky darkened and the yard sale was nearly over, I kept returning to the table with the radio. The items I had set up now looked like mere shadows under the soft glow of a street lamp. I decided to sit down by the radio, holding the faded letter in my hand, and tried to understand what I was meant to do. The voice on the radio returned with its clear message, "Return what was taken." I remembered the letter and wondered if there was an heirloom or a special object that had been lost and needed to be returned to the family. My grandfather had never spoken much about it, and now I feared that his silence was part of a darker secret. I spent hours searching through the old belongings in my house, looking for anything that might match the description in the letter. I found an old, small wooden box with carvings similar to those on the radio. Inside the box was a tiny, delicate locket with a faded photograph. The locket seemed out of place among the other items I was selling. Its presence stirred something inside me, a memory of whispered conversations and half-remembered stories. I held the locket in my hand, and at that moment, the radio spoke again. "Return what is lost," it said, almost as if it recognized the locket. The simple words made me believe that this small, precious item was the key to setting the spirit free. I decided then that I must return the locket to the person it belonged to, or at least to the spirit that longed for it. Late that night, when the yard sale was finally over and the streets had grown quiet, I returned to the backyard. I carried the locket and the letter, feeling that I was about to face something I had no choice about. The air was still, and the only sound was the soft hum of the old radio. I sat down at the table and placed the locket in front of me. I read the letter aloud, my voice steady even though I felt a strong sense of duty mixed with worry. The letter explained that the spirit would find peace only when the lost heirloom was returned to its rightful place. I did not know exactly what that meant, but the radio's persistent message guided me. "Return what was taken," it repeated, clear and unwavering. Following the hints from the letter, I set up a small circle on the ground using an old piece of ribbon I found in a drawer, and I placed the locket in the center. I closed my eyes and said a few simple words that I hoped would bring calm to the troubled spirit. I did not fully understand how a few words could change the past, but in that moment, I believed that this ritual was my only chance to right an old wrong. As I finished speaking, the radio's static changed. The low hum deepened, and then a single clear phrase came through. "Thank you." The words were soft and sincere. I felt as if a burden had been lifted, even though the night air remained cool and still. For a long time, nothing happened. I sat in silence, listening to the quiet sounds of the night. Then slowly, the radio went silent. I felt a relief that was hard to describe. I gathered the locket and the letter, and I carefully placed them in a small box. I knew that I had done what I could, but I also knew that the mystery might not be completely solved. There was a part of me that wondered if the voice would ever return. The following morning, I woke up with a sense of uncertainty. The memory of last night's events clung to me, and I found it difficult to shake off the feeling that something was still not right. I walked to the front yard, where the unsold items from the yard sale lay scattered. The radio sat in its usual spot on the table, silent and unassuming. I switched it on to check if it had resumed its normal static noise, but nothing happened. The radio remained quiet, as if it had lost its power or purpose. I left it there, packing up the rest of the sale items. Throughout the day, I kept thinking about the locket and the letter, and I wondered if I had truly done enough to help the troubled spirit. Neighbors came by later to help with the cleanup, and I explained the events in a few simple words. Most of them smiled kindly and said that sometimes old things bring back memories, but no one knew the truth of what had happened in my yard that night. I kept my secret close, not wanting to disturb anyone else with the heavy story of a lost past and a restless spirit. Weeks passed, and life slowly returned to its usual pace. I continued to live in the house my grandfather had left me, and I kept the small box with the locket and letter on a high shelf in my room. Every now and then, when I passed by the front yard, I would glance at the radio. It remained silent, as if it were just an old piece of broken equipment. Yet sometimes, in the still moments of the evening, I thought I heard a very soft whisper coming from it, a whisper that reminded me of that long night. I began to wonder if the spirit had finally found peace, or if it was simply waiting for another chance to speak. I tried to live with the uncertainty, focusing on everyday tasks and small joys. But on quiet nights, when the wind was soft and the house was dark, I would sit by the window and listen, half expecting the radio to come alive again with its clear, simple message. I learned that some secrets do not vanish easily, and that even when a message seems to be answered, its echo can linger in the background of our lives. The radio's whisper became a quiet reminder that the past still had a voice that was not meant to be silenced, but rather to be understood. One evening, nearly a month after the ritual, I was alone in the house. I had just finished my work when I heard the faint sound of static coming from the living room. I walked over slowly, my steps soft on the creaking wooden floor, and found the radio on the shelf where I had placed it after the sale. It was the same old radio that had spoken to me that day, and now it was making a soft noise that I had not heard before. I approached it carefully, and as I got close, I could see that the dial was moving on its own. I listened intently. The static cleared, and a familiar phrase emerged: "Remember and mend." I paused, realizing that the message was different from the one before. It was as if the spirit was trying to tell me something new, an instruction to look deeper into a part of my family's history that I had long ignored. This time, I did not feel as afraid. Instead, I felt a sense of duty mixed with sadness. I gathered the box with the locket and letter and sat down at the table once more. I reread the letter, trying to connect the new message with what I already knew. It seemed that the spirit was asking for more than just a simple return. It was a call to remember a past that had been hidden, to mend the broken ties that had once hurt so deeply. I decided then that I would try to find more answers. I spent the next few days searching through old family albums, letters, and even visiting the local town hall for records of the old family history. I discovered that many years ago, a close family friend had been hurt by a mistake that no one had spoken about for decades. The locket belonged to that person, and its loss had caused a chain of sorrow that had affected more than one generation. With this new understanding, I knew that my task was not finished. The message, "Remember and mend," urged me to do more than simply return an heirloom. I needed to face the family secret and help heal old wounds. I reached out to an aunt who was still alive, and I gently brought up the subject of the past. Over quiet conversations in her living room, she shared details that had been kept hidden for years, a tale of regret, loss, and a promise that was never fulfilled. Together, we arranged a small family gathering to talk openly about the events of the past. We visited the old graveyard where the family friend was laid to rest, and we left a simple token, a small flower and a handwritten note asking for forgiveness and understanding. I carried the locket with me during the visit, feeling that it was now a symbol of a broken promise being repaired. That night, as I returned home, I turned on the radio one final time. In the soft static, I heard a clear and calm voice say, "Thank you." The words were gentle, and they seemed to mark the end of a long and painful chapter. The radio then fell silent, its power seemingly spent, as if its mission had been completed. Today, the old radio sits on a shelf in my room, a reminder of that strange day and the lessons it brought. I sometimes hear soft sounds coming from it, but they no longer fill me with dread. Instead, they serve as a quiet echo of the past, a reminder that even old secrets can be healed when we face them with honesty and care. I have learned that not all voices from the past come with anger. Some carry a deep need for understanding and closure. In the end, the radio's whisper taught me that the past is not something to fear, but something that we must sometimes mend in order to move forward. If you ever find yourself clearing out old belongings and come across something that feels out of place, remember that every item may carry a story, and sometimes listening carefully can lead not to more fear, but to a chance to heal old wounds.